There's been so much talk and theories around the war in Ukraine and trying to predict what's going to happen next. But here's the reality, right? It's really hard to predict what President Putin will be doing next. So we're joined now by Janine Davidson, MSU Denver's president, also on the U.S. Department of Defense Policy Board. Thanks so much for joining us again this weekend. We always appreciate your perspective. Wanted to just start off with getting some of your insight into how countries and leaders have been navigating Putin's headspace and how you figure out what to decipher what is something he'll take action on versus a threat.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Anusha. This is just an ongoing crisis for all of us. You know, we had Dr. Fiona Hill on our campus last week, and she is probably one of the world's most prominent Putin experts. She actually wrote the book on Putin. So it's very insightful listening to her and thinking it through. Everybody is thinking these kinds of things. His headspace, you know, he has a very twisted sense of history about what Russia's role should be. He has a very twisted sense of history about what the Ukrainian people think. He thinks that they are sort of trapped under some spell by the West and that they need to come back under his umbrella in Russia, and that this whole operation is somehow liberating them. So you can imagine the cognitive dissonance that goes on in his head when it doesn't exactly roll out the way he was hoping in a few short days, taking the Ukrainian capital and everything else. I mean, I think that Vladimir Putin is sort of characterized by paranoia. He is incredibly paranoid about the West, in American leadership in particular, and NATO. It's a classic security dilemma. The more he talks about Russia's historic right to all these territories, the more those territories, and I'm talking about the Czech Republic, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, the more they are petrified and want to run even more closely to the West in the NATO umbrella. And this is where he is. So he's paranoid about that. The more they run west, the more paranoid he gets, and so on. And so he gets to this point now where he's incredibly frustrated that it's not working out the way he thought, that most of the entire world is against him. And despite all that, he's still very, very determined, which makes it a pretty difficult place for us all right now.
You know, with everything that you just did say then, but at the same time, military experts saying that a lot of the war has reached a stalemate, Ukrainian forces putting up and stalling, Russian forces as well. How does that then all play into what his next steps will be?
Sure. You know, I wouldn't call it a stalemate. I would say that he's not getting what he thought he was going to get. That's for sure. But militarily, he's in a little bit of a bind. I mean, on the one hand, he still has some options. If his conventional forces become spent, which they kind of are starting to get to a point, he has these difficult and scary options. He could go what we would call asymmetric, which means he can kind of like just get into this long, hard slog against the Ukrainians in sort of an irregular street to street fight that could go on for a really long time. Or he could go the other direction. And now we're talking chemical weapons, tactical nukes. He fired off a hypersonic missile the other day, and that was sort of the first use of that. It's not nuclear, of course, any of those things could be, but he's definitely rattling the saber on that. That said, it's pretty clear, and he has to know this at the end of the day, that if he does escalate in that kind of direction and it spills out outside of Ukraine, it drags NATO in, that he's done. I mean, the overmatch in military power and resolve from the NATO forces and the rest of the world completely outmatch his strength. There are millions more troops, active duty and reserves on the NATO side than there are his. There's something like 5.5 million on the NATO US side, and there's something like 1.3 million on his side, many of whom are already exercising and not exactly at the same level. So I wouldn't call it a stalemate, but I would call it kind of we're at a little bit of maybe, hopefully, an inflection point that could go the right direction.
All right. Thank you so much for that perspective. As always, we will stay in touch with you. We appreciate your time.